Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to my video for today. So today I'm going to be showing a game where I played with the white pieces. I started e4 and he played e6, the French defense. I continued knight to f3 and he played d5. I went for captures and he captured on d5 and I played c4. I don't really like to play d4 immediately in the French because I feel like that's what my opponents are most prepared for. So yeah, in this position, maybe I should have played d4 and sorry, d4, d4 and then c4, but because right now I allow him to play d4 and then I would have to push d3 and that would really limit my bishop development. But instead he goes knight to f6. Sorry, knight to f6. I played c captures on d5. He played knight captures on d5, and I played knight to c3. If he captures here, I can capture and then push d4. So, for example, if there b captures, I open this file for my rook, and then now I'm getting ready to push d4. My position will be good. Of course, he doesn't go for knight captures on c3, and he just continues development. Here I played bishop to c4, just attacking his knight, again, hoping that he will trade on c3. And he played bishop to e6, just defending his knight. And here in this position, he probably wants to play something like queen to e7, and this really blocks my development because now I have to block with my queen or block with my knight, and if I block with my queen captures, dislocates my knight. So that's probably what he should have went for. But he played bishop to e6, and this allows me queen to b3. And now I have this strong battery. If he, captures here, I would actually capture his bishop. And, after he captures and I recapture, now I'm in a better position because he has this undefended e6 pawn. His king side is weakened. So that is probably what I should have went for after bishop to e6, but I missed that move and I just went to capture it immediately. And after bishop captures and bishop captures, queen captures on d5, and now his queen is very strong, and there's no pawns. There's no pawns that I can push to get rid of it. My arrows. There's no pawns to push, and my light squared bishop is gone. So his queen will be solid on d5, and I played queen to b3 immediately because I want to offer this queen trade, and even if it doubles my pawns, my rook will have an open file, and hopefully I can eventually recapture into the c file and fix my pawn structure. So after queen to b3, he actually did capture. I captured, and he played bishop to c5. I played castles, but probably the best move is to play something like king to e2, just so I can bring the rook into the game and then maybe bring my king to f1. But instead, I just castled. I thought it was a little safer. He castled, and I went rook to a4. This rook to a4, so in this position, I'll explain to you why I played rook to a4. My bishop is trapped. If I push d4, well, then I lose my pawn. Because after knight captures, and bishop captures, now this bishop is stuck guarding this pawn, and this bishop is in an amazing position. Also, he has 3 pawns against 2 doubled b pawns. It will not be pleasant. I've lost a pawn and probably the game. d3 is also very weak because after he can just pile up on this pawn, and I can't really do anything to stop it because he will double up on the d file. He will double up on the d file, and it'll probably be too much. The knight will go to b4. I can't hold this pawn. So I play rook to a4 with the idea of pushing d4, or if the bishop moves, I can push b4, b3, and then fianchetto my bishop. And that is the only way I can get my bishop into the game. Rook to a4 actually is the strongest move in this position, but there were some others that were definitely okay to play. He plays rook a to d8, again putting pressure on this pawn, so I can never push it to d4 or d3. I played rook to c4, challenging his bishop, and this, I want the bishop to get off this diagonal, mainly so I can push b4. If he goes something like bishop to b4 to attack my pawn, it's not very effective because I have two defenders. So he plays bishop to b6, and I play b4. Again, b4 with the idea of b3, and then fianchettoing this bishop. He plays a6. He doesn't want me to push b5 and threaten his knight. That would grab a lot of space. It would dislocate his knight, and that would be good for me. I go b3, and probably would have been something like d4 also would have been okay, but I want to get my bishop into the game. And he plays rook f to e8. Maybe with the idea of bringing his rook to e2, but I'm not exactly sure yet. So I go bishop to b2 as planned, and in this position, he could probably play f6, and that would really limit my dark square bishop's utility. But instead, he plays rook to d3, with the idea of going after my doubled b pawn. This is okay, but it's not great because this allows me rook to g4 with a tempo, and this comes with the attack on the g7 pawn. So now he basically has to push g6. That's the only move. If he pushes f6, bishop captures. And also it's worth noting that rook to b3 doesn't work because after rook to g7, the king has to go to f8. Well, you can't go to h8 because you will face a lot of nasty discoveries. So once you go to f8, you just capture this pawn and you're winning because the bishop's not actually hanging, because if the rook captures the bishop, rook h8, king's forced to go to e7, unless you go to g7 and you lose the rook immediately. But after king to e7, you have this rook to e1 check with this will pick up the rook, and white will be winning this game. Most likely, he'll be up the exchange or rook for a minor piece. But I mean, black will have some counterplay with 3 or 2 passed pawns over here with a third potential passed pawn. But this will be favorable for white. So instead of capturing this pawn, he went for g6. I played bishop to c3, and this bishop is doing a lot. It's almost impossible to challenge this b3 pawn, and now my bishop is just an over-glorified pawn. Basically, it's connecting these 2 pawn islands. He plays knight to a7 with the idea of going knight to b5 to put pressure on my bishop, and I played a rook to e1. I don't want to let him play something like, I don't know, rook to e2 or something. That would be bad. Also, I want to play rook to e1 to exchange this rook because well, I want to remaneuver my knight. It's not doing that much right here because now this pawn is nicely defended by the bishop, so this knight can move. I played it rook to e1. He traded, and now I have an attack on his rook. He just went rook to d8. I played knight to c2. This knight to c2 comes with the idea of going knight to d4 to prevent the knight from hopping to b5, but I'm 1 move late. He goes rook to e8. Pinning my knight right here because, well, if I move my knight, he has mate in 1. So I played king to f1. This is the best move. Improving the position of my king, getting it out of this diagonal, stuff like that. Before, I wanted to trade rooks because then this helps eliminate the threat against the f2 pawn, because now this rook is on the d file, not the e file. It can't hop to e2. So, yeah, after king to f1, he went with his original plan of knight to b5, and I went knight to d4 anyways. This knight to d4 is a big blunder. I thought after, he would just trade, I would trade, he would trade, and I would trade, and I would try to figure out a way to undouble these pawns. And the material's equal. It might be hard for him to make progress. He would have to really work for the win. But what I missed is after knight to d4, he could have gone bishop captures, and after bishop captures on d4, instead of capturing this immediately and allowing my rook to recapture, he could go f5. And f5 with the idea of my rook has to stay along the fourth rank to protect the bishop. But if I go to f4, he just pushes g5. Same if I go to h4. And now my rook is forced to capture his pawn. I'm down the exchange. The game is probably lost. So I actually blundered the game, and I should have lost it. But he missed this idea, and instead, after I played knight to d4, he just exchanged. And after bishop captures, he played rook to d8 to put pressure on my bishop and my pawn. And this is great for me. I'm happy keeping my bishop along the strong diagonal and on c3, because again, now it serves as an over-glorified pawn. It connects my two pawn islands, and it'll be really hard for him to attack this pawn, because this pawn can only be attacked from these squares, and my bishop and rook both cover this square, while my pawn covers these two. So he played knight captures on c3, and we did it. We fixed our pawn structure. Not too great, but this is much better than it was before. And he played b5. He probably should have went rook to d1, and after king to e2, he could play rook to b1, and this would guarantee the b3 pawn, and he would be able to keep his advantage. However, he played b5, and I played king to e2. Now he can't get his rook to either of these squares to go behind my pawns. So he played king to f8, and I played c4. Again, I would love to undouble my pawns. He goes h5, and I played rook to g3, just getting my rook out of trouble. He played b captures on c4, and after b captures on c4, this position is completely equal. It is actually me who has less pawn islands. I have 2 pawn islands, and he has 3 pawn islands. So I'm actually doing well here. He plays rook to b8 to challenge my pawn, but this is easily countered by rook to b3. He goes c5 with the tactic, if I capture, he captures my rook. So instead, I play b5. This is the only move that allows me to continue the game. And he captured, I captured, and now I have this nice passed pawn with my rook behind it, and his pawn isn't as strong. So he goes king to e7. He wants to get his king into the game to protect the c5 pawn. I go king to d3, king to d6, and king to c4. Now we're in this standoff where his pawn can't be pushed, but mine can. In this position, he goes g5, and this is okay. I played b6 immediately. This is not the best move. The best move is rook to d3, because the king has no squares where he can still guard the c5 pawn. So he would probably go to somewhere here, and I could gobble up the pawn. However, I missed rook to b3. I'm running low on time, and I play b6. b6 is also a good idea, with the idea that I want him to play king to c6, and then I want to go b7. So I want him to play king to c6, and after b7 and an exchange, my king is closer to his pawns, and my pawns have yet to be pushed. That's why his king is just so far away from the action. After b6, he does indeed play king to c6, and I continue with the idea, b7. He plays f5, and f5 is a losing move, I believe, because now if he exchanges, for example, if I go f3 and now he exchanges, now I'm even closer to his pawns. There's no f7 pawn that can, push maybe f6 to protect g5. So, but in this position, I didn't push f3. Instead, I went for the most precise idea, rook to b5. And this basically forces him to capture the pawn because I have rook to c5 with tempo. For example, if he continues pushing, I just capture and he would capture the pawn. I go here and trade rooks. My king is even closer than his king to these pawns. So instead, after I played rook to b5, he didn't go for an idea like f4. He captured my pawn, and we traded off our queenside pieces. And now my king is one move ahead of his. So after king to c7, king to d5, king d7, king e5, he played f4. And after king to f5, king to d6, I can gobble up all these pawns, and he should be okay to resign. We played a couple more moves. King captures on g5, king to e5, king captures on h5, and king to e4. Maybe he can, bring his king all the way down here, start taking my pawns. But in this position, I just played g4, and I'm completely winning. If he doesn't capture, for example, if he goes f3, then g5, this will win the game. He can't enter the position, so my pawn will promote. And he, in this position, played f captures on g3 en passant, and I just captured my pawn. Now I have two connected passed pawns, 2 pawns and a king. My king is in great position. It's ahead of my pawns, which is the most important. And after king to f3 and g4, he realized that if he captures the f2 pawn, this pawn will promote. And if he goes something like f4, again, the same idea. His king is too slow, can never enter the position. So it was in this position after I played g4 that he resigned the game. I wanted to show this game, even though I had a lot of blunders. I wanted to show this game because I thought it was really interesting about how this endgame played out. Basically, what I did was I kept pushing my passed pawn, and this forced his king back into further position from the rest of the pieces. And I knew that I would never be able to promote this pawn. It's just that I needed to switch off everything here. And because he pushed h5, g5, and f5, my king only needed a few moves to get to his pawns, and his king would need, a lot to get close to my pawns. And yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to show the game. I thought it would be kind of helpful. And yeah, I felt really good because I was losing the whole game with my doubled B pawn and my isolated D pawn, but I was able to bring it back in the end game. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.